Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Rebecca Roberson, and I am with Ready for Tuesday. I am glad that you all are here with us. Before we get started, I do just want to go over a few housekeeping things for folks on the webinar. We are going to leave time towards the end of the webinar today for audience questions. We have enabled that Q&A function in Zoom. So please feel free to submit any questions that you have as we go. We're not ignoring them, we're just saving them for the end. We are also recording today's conversation, and we will share the recording with everyone who is in attendance afterwards. All right, a little bit of background about today's call. The 2026 election cycle is nearly underway, and your communication strategy should be as well. We're here today for a conversation tailored specifically for election officials who want to stay ahead of the curve with their communication strategy and planning. We're going to break down the essentials of a strong communications plan, and we hope that each of you will walk away with some practical tools, fresh ideas, and best practices that you can start implementing right away. We are joined by a terrific panel with a ton of experience across election administration and communications, and I'm looking forward to learning from each of them. To get us started, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. It looks like Dawn is the closest one to me, so Dawn, we will kick it to you first for an introduction.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Hello, everybody. I'm Dawn Kruger. I'm with the Contra Costa County Clerk Recorder Elections Department. I'm the Community and Media Relations Coordinator, which is a very long phrase for basically the PIO for our department. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining. Leah, we'll go to you next.
Hi everyone, my name is Leah Weintraub. I am a principal behavioral designer at Ideas 42. And Ideas 42 is a behavioral science research and design firm. And so for our civic engagement work, we do research about the barriers to voting participation and design solutions to make it simpler for people to be able to cast their ballots. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Ready for Tuesday team.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have TJ.
Last and least. Hi, everybody. I'm TJ with Ready for Tuesday. I normally host these conversations, but I'm very happy today to be here with my colleague, my excellent colleague, Rebecca, and I'm excited to contribute to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. We will go ahead and get started with our first question. This question is for you, Leah. So what gap did you all see in election communication that led to creating VoterCast?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, our team does behavioral science research and design. And what that looked like in the early days of our civic engagement work was partnering with a number of different election offices. And the origin for those partnerships was that folks would come to us and say, we want to be doing more voter outreach than we're doing, and we don't know what we should be saying, so please help us. And so we saw this barrier time and time again that election offices wanted to be doing more voter outreach and communications than they were doing. And of course, that makes sense. There are so many different priorities. Even if you're a dedicated communications person like Dawn, you have so many different channels, so many different things that you're working on. So thinking about that direct communication with voters can feel like it's, down there on the priority list. And so we started out thinking, okay, how can we help to lower that gap between the desire to do voter outreach and actually getting it done? And something that we realized through our work is that what works in one place with voter outreach can sometimes, in some cases, very many, can work in another place, right? Every election office has dates and deadlines to communicate. Even if you're running all mail elections, there are still there you have to talk to voters, just like if you're running elections that are primarily at vote centers or election offices, or polling sites. So what we learned from each of these engagements is that there's a deep desire to do voter outreach, and there is the potential to be able to systematize it.
Great, thank you. And that's a little bit, you also went into kind of how VoterCast was built. Can you also go in a little bit to the science behind effective voter communications or elections communications as well? I think you touched on it a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put on my nerd hat for a second. There is a wealth of literature about what is effective in voter outreach and communications. Everything from, academic tests and saying, thank you for being a voter, being more effective than thank you for voting because you're activating identity. There is so much that's out there. And we tried to incorporate as many of the like top line findings from academic literature as possible in VoterCast. And I could run through a lot of different papers, but I would say that there are like five main top lines of effective voter outreach. The first is simplicity, making something easy to read. So that's like clear message, clear top line of what you're trying to communicate. The second is credibility. And I think of credibility actually in two ways. The first is a human level of credibility. So taking off the anonymity of the internet and showing like, hi, I'm Leah and I work for Ideas 42, or I'm Dawn and I work for Contra Costa, right, election office. And so revealing that you're a person with a name can give credibility. And also, having the credibility of an election office can help to really make your messages resonate. So, when you're sending something out about a voter registration deadline, if people see your logo or the name of your election office, that conveys that they can trust the information that they're seeing. Another thing is timeliness. So making sure that a message goes out at the point where an election has the potential to be salient or close to the time that someone can take action. Because, if I read about going to an exhibit at a museum and it doesn't open for 2 weeks, I'm probably going to forget about it. But if it's closer to the opening date, maybe I can make time for it. Same goes for elections, right? If you're communicating about a date or a deadline that's upcoming, the further out, the more likely people won't be able to take action on it. Speaking of action, the fourth one is a call to action. So, including something specific that people can move toward. And behavioral science literature has a lot on calls to action and finds that the vaguer the call to action, the less likely someone will be able to follow through on it. So, if you have a button on your website that says learn more about what, where, what do I need to learn? That's less of a kind of punchy call to action than something like sign up for ballot tracking now, where it's a specific action and people know what they're going to follow through on and they know that they're going to get that little dopamine hit when they complete it. And then the last one is accessibility. So making sure that communication is accessible to all. That could be through language. That could be through using alt text on an image. It could be by making sure that the color ratios are such that someone with a vision impairment can read the language. The Center for Civic Design, which I know our partners of Ready for Tuesday, have such fantastic materials about accessibility, and yeah, we're a big fan of their work.
Thanks. And that was a really good plug also to CCD. They do have great work. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed when I'm reading it because there's so much that I just don't know and you want to dive in. But I think VoterCast makes all of that really easy for election officials who are looking to create those supplemental communications pieces. And we'll talk a little bit about that throughout the rest of our webinar. So thank you for answering those two questions right off the bat for us. All right, next question for the larger group. What are most election offices underestimating when it comes to a communication strategy? And Dawn, we'll start with you for this one.
Great, thanks. I think honestly, and this is kind of what I've seen as I've started my work here. I'm a newbie, as it were, I guess, in elections. It's been 5.5 years just about. So, but it's interesting because I think every other entity, business, communications is a must-have. And when I came to the elections division here, it was I think considered more of sort of a nice to have. So I think that That's something that's really important, that elections officials really need to understand, that communications really isn't just a nice to have, it's a must have. So, and that's because of the just proliferation of misinformation. And it's just so critical that elections offices get out the right information at the right time, like Leo was saying. And it's clear, concise, and simple for folks to understand, and gives them an action to take, and helps them to understand where to go when they need to get the trusted information that they need for elections in particular.
TJ, what's your take on this?
I mean, I think that I've got lots of different takes on it. I would say that one thing whenever I talk to offices that I try to stress is ensuring that you're not setting yourself up for failure by trying to do too much. So focus on a few core messages, tie those messages to something essential about your operations. So they may be changes to law, changes to polling places, whatever it might be, and really focus on those things. Don't view your communication strategy as a list of boxes that need to be checked, but rather as like a core set of messages that you want to get across, understanding that you're never going to reach everybody. But one of my favorite sayings is not being able to do it all is a poor excuse for doing nothing. And that was kind of, I mean, here at Ready for Tuesday, when I worked at an election office, that's always been kind of my approach. Like, we can't do everything, but we can do something, and that something can matter.
Thank you. Leo, what about you?
Oh, I love that, TJ. I think that repetition is an underappreciated superstar of communication, in that sending out consistent messages, it could be the same message that you're sending out like every other day, but having that schedule of consistency is really important because it helps to establish the credibility. And it's not reinventing the wheel each time. It's figuring out almost the like minimum viable product, or the smallest step that you need to take, but making sure that there is consistency is really important. And I think that also requires being strategic about where to put energy and where not to. Right. Like I love something that TJ said of you can't do everything. And so it's really figuring out what's the place that you can show up consistently, and what are ways that you can repeat messages or slightly tweak things so that it's not such a huge lift to be able to keep on showing up and develop that practice.
And to add on to what Leah said, that consistency in terms of building a brand, being recognizable, having a voice, is really, really important, right? Like, you become a trusted voice because people understand the information that you're sending out is authoritative, it is correct. So just relying on that consistency, both in tone and also in how your communications look, and in some ways, doing that right is a way of lessening the burden. You don't have to use Leah's phrase, reinvent the wheel every time. Use the same thing, not only because it's easier, but also because when you think about your larger strategy, it's actually better.
So if an election office or an election official is starting from scratch, they have nothing. What are the first three things that you all think that they should look into building?
So I'll jump in. I mean, I think I won't put sign up for VoterCast first because that feels like too much of a plug. But look for excellence in other offices, right? Especially other offices in your state. In many cases, those offices are operating under the same set of rules that you're operating under. And I think one of the hallmarks of election administration is we all look to our neighbors, look to our friends and colleagues as exemplars of excellence. And what can you take from them? Maybe give them a nod, give them a call. Hey, Don, that was a really good social media post. I'm going to steal it. So do that first, and then sign up for VoterCast, and recognize that having a plan, I guess this is kind of the third thing, having a plan is the best way to make sure that you actually follow through on communicating. Those are my three.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it's funny. I think I started sort of from scratch, I would say. I came in and the person that had been in my position had been out for a while. And so I sort of had to figure out when I came into the position, where are we communicating? What are the handles? What's happening? And so I did turn to colleagues across the state even. And I'll say that even I would say 6 years ago, Leah, you mentioned this, there wasn't a lot out there because I think, it wasn't quite as, I don't know if important's the word, but, there just weren't enough resources for folks. But that was one of the first things I did was to look and see like, what are other people doing? I really definitely could have used VoterCast when I started. But that was really important. But the other thing I did was I actually built a social media policy because I felt like I need to know what the guidelines are. Like, how do I create things, but also how do I make sure the folks in my office know this is what our goal is? And then we talked about, it's been mentioned, make sure you build your brand. Like, even if it's just your county logo or your office logo, make sure that that is consistent throughout. And then also, I would say, kind of what's your tone or your plan or your playbook, kind of how do you want to appear out in the world and decide what that looks like. I think those are really important when you get started, and that's kind of what I did.
Don, I love that you came up with a social media policy. I think that's really smart, fantastic. And I want to reiterate what you're saying on having a brand guidelines. Even if it's just these are the colors that we use and this is the tone that we try to deploy, having a shared set of principles of this is what look and feel we want our outreach to have across channels is just such a fantastic foundation to have. I would also say that a communications plan is great because, at least for me, being able to see that I could actually plan out my voter outreach and communications, that I don't need to sit at my computer every other day if that's the timeline that I'm thinking about putting something out on the internet. But and figure out like, okay, what am I going to say today? But that there's something ready made for me that I just need to plug and play. That's so nice. And it also shows that so much of the external communications is you can set it not defensively, right? And when everything is all planned out, that means that your office probably has more space and capacity to be able to respond in those high pressure moments, because you have that foundation set of like, these are the things that I know that I have to communicate on this day based on our election calendar. And so then it gives you the flexibility and the mental space to be able to plug in when things might get more challenging.
I
I would
love
also, yeah, go ahead, TJ.
keep going, Lee. I'm sorry. My bad.
The last thing that I would say is I really don't believe in a throwing spaghetti at the wall to start strategy with communications. And by that, I mean, don't try to make an X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, email, and SMS plan all at the same time. Think about make your best guess on where voters are. Maybe you know that specifically. Maybe, based off of profiling, try to make an estimate of where you think you'll get the most bang for your buck to start, and then really master that. And by mastering, I mean get into that consistency and the rhythm of going off on that channel, and then you can think about adding to it. So don't try to do everything at once.
As probably the most excruciatingly spaghetti at the wall person that both Rebecca and Leah at least know, I will underscore what Leah said, that is the one place not to be spaghetti at the wall. Make sure that you're doing things in a way that you can maintain them, that you can presence, and that's a big part. Like a big part of the plan is kind of what you don't plan for, right? We're not going to do these things because we don't have capacity or the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I think that that's a really, really important thing. And then going back to Leah's point about planning things out in advance, every minute that you save doing, a social media post about a registration deadline or early voting dates that 12 months or 15 months in advance. Every minute that you do, every minute that you spend preparing those things in advance is a minute that you get during the active election to do fun stuff, right? All of your election workers are there with you. Do some more human focused, like these are the people who secure our elections, these are the people who give their time to make sure that we have this process. Because I think planning for that, or at least planning to give yourself time for that, those are really important, human elements of the process that are really important in engendering trust.
And I'll just do a VoterCast plug right here, so you don't have to, TJ. And something in the platform is that for each topic, there is a recommended send date of X number of days before an election. And so if you're struggling to figure out with your communications plan of what should go when, there are those helpful guidelines in VoterCast that can lower the lift. And I know that in one election official I spoke with who used VoterCast, she said that she did all of her planning for an upcoming election cycle over the span of an afternoon. So she created all of the posts and the plan in one afternoon. So hopefully that lowers the barrier to entry there, because I know that sitting down and writing a plan can feel overwhelming sometimes.
It certainly can. All right. So 2026 election cycle is pretty much underway for folks. So how should election officials think about communications differently heading into this cycle, into the 2026 cycles? Whoever wants to take it first, go for it.
I'll jump in. I would say, good news and bad news. I think the good news is that we're kind of getting the same misinformation, and so we know how to respond. And the bad news is that we're getting the same misinformation because it's just kind of over and over again, right? So, but I think that that does give you more power to kind of amplify the correct information and let people know where they can get the right and the trusted information. And again, if it's on repeat and you do this consistently, and to Leah's point and also TJ's point, and this is something that I do, I just reuse some of the similar stuff that I've created previously for other elections, and I might freshen it up a little bit, but it's the same message because people don't hear it the first time. They might hear it the third time or after that. So again, I just think, that is the piece. Remember that this misinformation is in this case not necessarily different. Unfortunately, there's more power for others to amplify the misinformation, but also more power for elections officials to amplify the correct information. So
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if you're an election official who had a good plan for 2020, 2022, 2024, don't fix what ain't broke. Make changes that are necessary, or make improvements that you want to make, but continue to be consistent. I know we focused a ton on social media kind of as a main method of outreach, but recognize that not everybody is on social media. I would say younger generations are even less likely to be on social media more and more. So recognize kind of the impact of whatever methods you're using. Rely on traditional media, continue to do press releases, continue to do those types of things, and recognize there's no silver bullet for doing any of this perfectly. You've gotta make an effort at it. And that, I think, speaks to, as Don was talking about, why this stuff matters, why folks have to pay attention to it.
Yeah. I want to build off that and say that I feel like in this media environment, and that's online and also in traditional media, it's not just one media environment, it's a lot of little biomes, right? And so that means that for each biome, there are certain types of plants that grow better there. Like you're not going to have a deciduous tree in a jungle. And so understanding the right plants or the right animals that go in each biome is really important. And to kind of get out of that tortured metaphor a little bit, what I'd say is that that means that the messenger, there's a lot of opportunity in being creative with messengers, and thinking what is the right maybe partner organization to reach this audience, or is there someone on our team that loves TikTok and they would be a great face for TikTok, versus someone who has a very academic writing style and they'd be great for a press release. So figuring out the right messengers, whether it's internal to your office or external, to fit within each kind of pathway that you're going on, because people are getting their information in such different ways from each other, and because the each kind of information pathway is a pathway of trust, really figuring out how you plug into that specific biome is really important. And I think it's becoming even more important as time goes on.
I've got two things here. Number one, I think congratulations to Leah for being the first person to say either biome or deciduous on one of our webinars. I don't know if you had uh some type of bet. But second, I think recognizing that a lot of the offices that we work with, a lot of the work that we put out is meant for small offices, right? Meant for places where they don't have a Don. You can still do a lot of the things that Leah is talking about, while just being mindful of audience, right? So even if it is just you spending a little bit of time thinking, does this work for this audience? Does this work using this information pathway? I think that goes a long way, kind of showcasing that thoughtfulness. And then going back to the spaghetti on the wall phrase, if it doesn't work, you do something different and you move forward from there. Giving yourself permission to fail, or at least permission to not hit it 100% every time, I think is really important.
What is the saying? Don't let the fear of striking out keep you from the game, keep you from playing the game. Um, all that really helpful. So, what role does technology play, and where can it actually make things worse if it's used poorly? Whoever would like to start.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I am a huge kind of, I wouldn't say advocate, but I'm pretty pro AI, pro generative AI. I think that it can do lots of excellent things, especially for under-resourced or even well-resourced uh, jurisdictions. I think using those types of tools and not being thoughtful about it, not keeping the human in the loop, not going back and considering all of the things that we've talked about, that is a slippery slope to something that isn't helpful. To the extent that election officials, election offices are those authoritative voices, you can lose much of that authority by putting out incorrect information. And it's easier than ever to quickly put out info. And that means it's easier than ever to quickly put out incorrect info. So how do you make sure you hold the line there?
Yeah, I agree. I think that definitely AI has certainly helped in terms of, trying to create messages over and over again for me. Hurts my brain a little bit, but that's been helpful, but always double check. And then there's also great platforms, depending on kind of where you're at with your social media or your marketing or whatever. There's some terrific platforms to use. Just as TJ said, the human element has to be in there. You have to double check everything because I've made mistakes and posted something too early, or I mean it wasn't gonna change anybody's life, or be super detrimental, other than that I had to go to my boss and say like, oops, sorry, that wasn't great. But that the human element is ever critical.
Yeah, I really want to double tap that maintaining the human is important, especially with, humanizing your office, especially if it's, coming up against some criticism or vitriol, then one of the core ways that you can do that is by leading with the human, putting a face, talking about, being just a neighbor and a fellow community member. And so I think that making sure that that humanness always comes through, even when messages are generated through AI. So I really want to double tap the reading through things, making sure that it sounds like it's your voice still, and adapting what AI says, because it's an incredible tool and a huge time saver. And also, it should not make you deviate from the brand guidelines or the voice that your office has established.
What is one simple tool? We already talked a little bit about AI, so that can be your tool if you'd like, or tactic, that can immediately improve communication effectiveness.
I think, and this is something that I keep having to kind of put on repeat sometimes in my office, and sometimes remind myself, if I'm being honest, is you don't need to be fancy. I mean, a lot of us know a lot of lingo as it relates to elections, but the people we're speaking with just need to know kind of the simple facts, right? Like, keep it simple and plain language, and just make sure you're whatever you're trying to put out, there's one message. Don't complicate it with, oh, but here's a detail and here's a detail. Just, make sure it's the one message that you're trying to get out with the call to action. I mean, I think that would be my one thing.
Yeah, and I'd say authenticity is huge. Originality. I think it was a report through Bloomberg Cities or Bloomberg Philanthropies that showed that the messages that are shown to be authentic. So think of production value, right? Me standing with my phone, talking like I'm, speaking to my phone on doing a selfie, like those types of messages where you're just face to face with the camera. Those hit better, or at least they track better. They get better engagement than something that you spend X amount of dollars getting professionally produced. Like being mindful. I mean, you want it to be good. You got to make sure that you reach that threshold, but don't torture yourself with the idea that if you're putting out a video or something like that, that it needs to be perfect. And in some cases, perfection isn't your friend.
Mm. Oh, I love that. And I think I'm going to just build on that and say that showing who you are, right? So showing who your office is, making sure that you make that connection clear, and perhaps who, if you're doing a face to camera video, that you say who you are. Maybe you have like a fun background that is reflective of your jurisdiction so that it's recognizable to people. So really like leaning on cues to credential yourself to reveal who you are.
When I used
Thank
to do TV interviews when I worked at an election office, I had the same spot basically every time. And behind me was one of my colleagues who he earned the nickname B-roll because he was always in the background or always in the B-roll uh, for any type of video that we had folks, news stations or whatever it might be. So I said, "Hey, B-roll, what's going on?"
That's funny. All right, so we've got about 10-ish minutes left before I want to open it up for Q&A, because we do have a couple of questions in there. So I am going to skip a couple of questions that we have already kind of answered through other questions. So I apologize to our panelists in advance if this feels like a curveball. But one thing that I wanted to dive in a little bit more about is how can election offices better partner with organizations without overcomplicating things? I know we've talked a little bit about trusted messengers, so I was hoping that we could expand a little bit on that. Whoever would like to take it first, feel free.
I can jump in since I guess I've kind of been doing this. I think you need to understand kind of what you're really good at, right, as an elections office, but also kind of what you're going to need help with. And the word trusted messenger, regardless of all the work that we do to try and be a trusted messenger, we are still the government. So that is always going to be a barrier in a lot of communities. And I say that with experience coming from nonprofit sector also, and then working in government. So um, understand who the folks are, if it's nonprofits in your community, if it's community ambassadors who are trusted messengers, and partner with those folks. Also, I think one thing that's important to know is that if you're going to do the partnering, make sure that that you're doing it in the best possible way. And I say that just because I think a lot of times our nonprofits and our community ambassadors they're asked again and again to help on a lot of different things, and we have to understand that if it's something that's not necessarily directly related to their mission and you're asking for help, there needs to be some I mean, for lack of a better term, I guess, compensation in a way, right? Like if it's not monetary, it's at least something where you're kind of offering them an opportunity for promotion, or I don't know, something like that. So that's just kind of my experience, is that, if you want to kind of get past that barrier, there's tons of nonprofits doing work. There's a lot of folks in the community that people trust that you can go to.
So if Don was moving away from the government as a partner, I will underscore like other partners in government as really effective, at least in terms of reach, partners or possible partners. So I've seen jurisdictions that near voter registration deadlines, they provide X number of uh inserts for the municipal utility, and people got hey, are you registered to vote? Here's the early voting dates for election day alongside their paper utility bill. I've seen, jurisdictions that partner really effectively on emergency alerts, emergency response, and those types of things. So I would say that, going to folks in advance, having a plan, again, building on the webinar topic, but having a plan, having a ready ask, hey, we may need this from you if this happens. That's a really effective way, I think, of tapping into those, not nonprofit, but rather other pieces of government partnerships.
Mm. I love that. I want to draw out a couple of themes that I hear both TJ and Don sharing, which is um, have a clear ask of something that you want. Try to figure out what can be mutually beneficial for each party. And so you're bringing both your office as well as other governmental or nonprofit partners to the table in a way that serves everyone's needs. I love the idea of advisory councils. I talked with an election office that created a nonprofit advisory council where there was very much a mutual exchange of resources, that took off the burden of the election office from creating things, gave them ready-made partners, and then the partner organizations loved that they had the official office that was, amplifying the materials that they had created. I also, have seen models of election offices, even partnering in an official or like financial capacity with nonprofit organizations to distribute materials. There are so many creative ways to go about it, whether you have budget or not, to really lean on, what serves to the strengths of each party and can help with the shared purpose of educating voters and encouraging people to come out and participate.
Thank you all. I think we have time for probably one more question on our end. So I'm going to go with, how do you measure whether communications efforts are truly reaching and resonating with voters? What does success look like, to you?
Oh, this is a fun one that us as behavioral scientists get a lot of questions about. I've spoken to election offices that use a lot of different ways to measure whether something's working or not. There's obviously the analytics on social media platforms that show you likes and clicks, and that's some of those are what we would call vanity metrics, where it's like, okay, is this actually changing someone's mind, or is it also actually leading them to take action? It's harder to know, but it's a signpost to lean on. Then, someone told me, I forget who it was. They said, well, I know if our external communications work depending on how hot the phone lines are. So they said people are always going to call in if something I communicated was not effective, or they have questions about what I said. So there are those kind of more informal ways to measure if something's working or not. And then, of course, there are more formal ways to test out certain messages. So we're big fans of A/B tests or randomized control trials, where you put different messages side by side and you see which one is most effective. It sounds scary. Sometimes it still scares me, but it's pretty low level, and a lot of platforms allow you to just run two things at once, and then they'll show you different analytics of the response that you get. And so there it depends on the action, right? So if something is calling people to sign up to ballot tracking, you have that feedback loop. You can see the direct relationship between your social media post about signing up for the system and then actual signups. In other cases, it's harder to know if someone, right, if the action that you want people to take is tell your neighbor. How are you going to track that? That's harder. It's harder to know. So you might have to like rely on some of those vanity metrics more.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a little tricky as elections offices, because people don't I don't think they interact with you as much when there's not an election. So you'll see sort of these peaks and valleys. We did do a big ad campaign we had some grant funding for back in 2024, and that was phenomenal because we were able to really do a lot of tracking, like how many clicks on our website, how many reactions to social media. We did surveys, we did testing on messaging. Now, everybody can't do that, but that is certainly a way to kind of really get that information. But for me, kind of on the regular, I use Hootsuite, and that's what I use to kind of create reports. And for me, it's more about sort of followers, right? Am I increasing my followers? Because again, I'm not going to get, in sort of an off cycle, whenever that is. I'm not really sure because I feel like it's been on for about, 5 years or whatever. But in a quote unquote off cycle, I'm not going to get a lot of reactions, and so if for me, it's really, am I bringing more people in to get that message on my different platforms and on the different areas that I'm trying to communicate the message out. So
Yeah, no, I don't know if I'm being a contrarian here, but I do think that the making sure that you're not trying to track information or gather analytics, like to the extent that it stops you or takes time away from doing things that you would be tracking, I think is a really important idea to hold. To Don's point, election offices don't have the same type of reach as other parts of government or other organizations. I think one thing that you can think about or that you can consider is whatever you want to track, make sure you have a purpose for it, make sure that you have the resources to do it, but also think about how you're tracking it across time. So you may have never tracked anything. So you see, okay, we've got a 55% email open rate, and that held through the 2026 general election or during the 2026 primary election. Compare across election cycles, see what you did differently. So, get started in a really small and intentional way, but then build up over time, looking at other additional elections and doing comparisons so that you're not comparing yourself to the sheriff's office or whatever it might be that has 10 times the following, 100 times the likes, those vanity metrics, to use Leah's term.
Perfect. Well, thank you all. And that was perfect timing. I think that we can go ahead and shift to our Q&A. We've got about 4 questions in there now. So the folks on the webinar have additional questions, feel free to put them in. So the first question is in the beginning of the call, we talked a little bit about a social media policy. I believe, Dawn, you brought it up as one of the first things that you did. So what would be some of the key components of a social media policy?
Yeah, great. Key components are, sort of what is your kind of, I guess, chain of command, right? Like, because you need to make sure that if you're putting messages out, that the head of your department or division knows what those messages are, is in agreement. I think that's a key piece. It's also sort of letting staff know, right, that like if folks are going to interact with your social media, that they need to kind of know what the rules of engagement are, right? Like you don't want people to kind of be putting political, any sided political information in. And that goes out to kind of also folks who are trying to comment. Now, it's tricky because as government organizations, we really can't, there's so many rules around free speech and what can be, removed in your comments and things like that. But I think if you can lay that out, so for example, when I first did the social media policy, I sort of laid out the rules of engagement on social media that are pointed to in kind of all of our bios, right? Like if it's, don't be political, don't use bad language, things like that. And there's this sort of list of things that, you can follow. And so that kind of gives you, the rules that if you see a comment and you're like, I don't think that should really be something that's on a comment on one of our posts, I have to go to county council every time. So, but at least you sort of have those kind of rules of engagement, right? Like, I think those are kind of the topmost components in terms of a social media policy. I mean, there's more things too, but I will say that I was lucky. When I first started, there weren't all these, or maybe I didn't know about them anyway, great opportunities for that were online, Tag and Ready for Tuesday and all these things that you could kind of go and get these outlines. I just, to quote Fred DeCaro, copy and steal everything, right? Or what is it? R&D, rob and duplicate. I found something from Marin County and just kind of copied what they did, but did it for our purposes. So, I think that there's a lot of ways that you can kind of find things that'll help you get started.
Perfect. Thank you, TJ. Leah, anything to add?
+1 to what
Okay.
Don said.
Perfect. All right. A follow-up question. We talked a little bit about traditional media earlier as well. This person wants to know, is there any advice for distributing more traditional forms of media as a part of your larger communications and outreach plan?
Yeah, I'm sure Don has much more to say about this than I do at this point, but I will say one of my you've heard several of my things that I try to reiterate my own consistent messaging, right? And I'd say as it relates to traditional media, so think about radio, newspapers, TV, those types of things, send it in a way that makes it as easy as possible for whatever distribution channel it is to actually use. So if it's going to the newspaper, write it in AP style, include a picture. If it's going to the TV station, write it with that in mind, or include B-roll, using the B-roll phrase again. Make it easy so that whoever's on the other end of receiving those things, they have to take as few steps as possible to actually share it and use their own distribution channel to get your message out. Don't make it harder for them than it needs to be.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And, I use all the forms of communication. I mean, some folks have talked about, oh, do you really need to use a press release? Well, I still do press releases and I send it. I have a contact list for all of the different news outlets here in the Bay Area, right? And then I'll send that out to them, but I'll also put it up on X because there's still a lot of news outlets that are watching X, and even the also Facebook. There even the sort of more local maybe blogs that reach a good number of people, because that's a good way to get the right information out. And then I also do a newsletter, which to TJ's point, don't try to do everything all at once. When I started, I said I'm not doing a newsletter. Like, I just don't have that bandwidth. And so that was something that I kind of added later. So I think, and that was something where we were able to use our registration list and send to anybody who had an email listed. But I just think that what you can do is kind of start with what you want to start with, and use that, and then kind of build from there. Because if you do too much all at once, it's just completely overwhelming.
Yeah, I love that. I think the only thing that I would add is to TJ's point of making it as easy for the distribution mechanism to be able to just put it out on their format. Also, try to put yourself in the brain of the person that you're sending it to. And so if you're going to a local newspaper, then they need a news hook. They need a so what of why people should care in that particular moment. So making sure that you are operating off of both the conditions that that person is working within. So maybe you know that the editorial deadline for a day is 4 p.m. So you need to send your press release in the morning so that they get it. Or you know that they need to have that timeliness hook. So making sure that you give them what they need and the timeline that they need it, to maximize the potential that they can run with your content.
Those are all great points. Thank you. The next question I think probably has to do a little bit more with the AI piece that we were discussing. So they asked, what if some people are challenged in using this type of communication? We would like to use it for our election judges for communication, however, they are afraid of tech. So I guess we could expand that to any sort of new technology, so to speak, that some folks may not be familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes down to the audience question, in recognizing that voters, when it comes to election communications, voters are just one of several really important groups of folks that you work with. So the ways that you communicate or the effort that you put into communicating with your election workers, using the example that this person had in their question, uh, probably different than what you do for voters generally. And you can do much more to gather information about those folks who are working with you directly, to make sure that you're meeting their needs. Uh, because selfishly for your office, their needs are really your needs. You need them to be responsive. You need their help to get through election day. So the extra effort there of recognizing what communication methods work best is totally worth it. And you can do other things I mean, I remember when we moved to electronic poll books, or when we moved to signing folks up for training sessions via email. Those required work. We had to sit with people. We had to, hold some folks' hands in getting them to a place where they could reliably use whatever tech it was. And I think that it's worth it to take the time and doing those types of things, even having an opportunity where folks can come in and you can show them how to set these things up. That those are great things to do.
Yeah, totally. Something that I love is like a social media takeover. In some ways, that can be really helpful as a starting place, to have someone who is perhaps more comfortable with technology, take over like a feed for a day, or help to get an office started, to kind of show the way that things are done and create kind of the material to steal from, right? On your even on your own platforms. So you all can get creative about who the right face is for each platform. I mean, even if it's just for a day where a voter takes over the feed and is doing something, then it creates a regular cadence and can be material to teach some folks who might need a little bit more time or a little bit more support to come along board.
Yeah, I agree. I think kind of along those lines, something that I just sort of thought of in terms of if you're election judges or, poll workers in our case, tend to skew older, but we also have student election workers, right? So maybe there's a way to sort of do some cross-generational connection there where you can help them get connected. And the younger folks are going to be a lot more savvy with AI and all these different things. Like that might be a way to do that. And kind of along those lines, in our office, we have two different, I mean, for elections, we have one, but I also do clerk recorder. So we have two different social media committees that meet every other week. And so we actually are pulling information from our staff who are kind of boots on the ground to try and get more content that's engaging. So anyway, just, along the lines of trying to work with the folks who maybe are a little bit more savvy with that.
Perfect. I think we have time for the last question. So this person wants to know if y'all have any tips for relaying authenticity or conveying that you are in community with the voters in your county, if you're not comfortable videoing yourself. So this probably comes back to the conversation we had about the videos, the cell phone videos and things like that with engagement. Whoever would like to take it first.
Don? Sorry.
We both came off mute at the same time. I mean, I think for me, what's really worked well and done a lot for our office is these social media committees, if you're able to. I mean, I know maybe that seems kind of daunting to pull a bunch of people and get them into a committee to talk, but I think it not only helps you be more authentic and engaging, it engages your staff because there's going to be folks on your staff who are, into that and know how to use social media and are good at it. And they can kind of help you. And it goes, right, it goes both ways. It engages your, the folks you're trying to reach, but it also engages your staff. I think that that's a really great way to try and do that.
Yeah, and I would just say, I mean, I don't want to push anybody to do things that they're uncomfortable with. But sometimes that not being completely comfortable, I am never completely comfortable doing these webinars. I don't know if anybody is, but kind of leaning into that and using it as an opportunity to display authenticity. If you're willing, if it's a phobia that you can overcome, that it has the opportunity to actually increase how authentic you're coming off as. So don't do anything you're not comfortable with, but if you're willing to try, it can actually be a strength.
Yeah. And there's really not one way that is the right way to communicate. So I would say also, like, don't feel pressure just because a study came back and said that face-to-camera videos are effective. That does not mean that you have to do that or that it would be necessarily effective for your audience or your jurisdiction. So go by what works for you. And also, maybe start with something that feels a little less scary. And then who knows, maybe you build up the confidence and you do want to try that out. There's no right answer in communications, which can be liberating. I recognize that it can also feel overwhelming, but taking that first step, figuring out something that feels doable for you all, right? That's the nice thing about a face-to-camera video is it lowers the barrier to entry if video is something that you want to do. But if video doesn't feel like it's right, then there are so many other different steps that you can take to put your office out there and to get out information about elections.
And that's perfect timing. So I thank you all very much. Thank you to everybody who joined us. As always, our inbox is open. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email us at support@readyfortuesday.com. I encourage everyone on this call to check out VoterCast to help with your elections communications planning. And thank you guys so much, and we will see you next time.